And
While participants, any confirm they can hear us. And you will get an it's not happening here. Julius Navinde and Aziza Adekoya. Adekoya. It's any confirm you can hear us. Julius Navinde, can you confirm you can hear us?
Hapo kwa Miriam nilikuwa nataka ndio kwa sababu ni quiet mtano inaanza, lakini Miriam ametoka
Let's settle in and amazing session. What's your much pick? Yeah. Good morning, everyone. That's good to be here.
I'm sure it's been a great time. So it's going to be another wonderful session. So this session is on women and culture in African politics. This session was organized by Professor Sharon. She's from University of Ibadan. And myself, name is Angela Badajem. I'm from Obafemi University. So it's a privilege to have you all here, and it's a privilege to have us here today. So we have 4 presenters, right? 5 presenters. And I want to welcome our presenters on the line to this session. Yes. So the first person that will be presenting this session is from Kenyatta University and Government University College. They will be presenting on women, politics, and culture in Kenya. So I don't know if yes, Julius is online. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes, I can hear you.
Beautiful. So you're welcome to your presentation. Let's do 10. Okay, so you'll be having 10 minutes for your presentation. And I think everybody will present before we'll take questions. Okay, good. So, Julius, please, can you go 10 minutes for your presentation? You can put on your video if you can. If your network is okay. It will nice to have you see you.
I can put on the video. Can you see me? Hello, can you see me?
No, not yet.
Can you bring your camera down?
I think
the network might not be strong enough.
I think it's not right. I see if I can be able to share my slides.
Yes, you can. You can share your slides.
You can put on
your video, then share your slides.
Okay.
You can request to share your slides.
Julius, can you hear us?
So I can.
Can you put up your video and then share it? Because I think your video is.
I'm told sharing is not turned on.
Okay, so now I just send the request. So you can go ahead to share your slides.
So I put off the video.
Yes.
Yes, it is off. You can put it off. Just share your slides.
Okay. Present without sharing. Can I present without sharing the slides? Can I present without sharing the slides?
Okay. Yes, you can present without sharing your slides. So you can go ahead.
Okay. I'm co-presenting with my colleague from Bomet, Farina. So I'll take like 5 minutes, then she can be able to conclude.
All right.
My name is Julius Nabende from Kenyatta University, and our paper is talking about women, politics, and corruption in Kenya. The paper is divided into 3 sections. The first section, I'm giving just an introduction, a general overview of corruption in Kenya. And the second part is dealing with the corruption. Women fight against corruption in Kenya. And the last part will deal with the women entanglements in corruption. And so I'll deal with the first 2, the introduction and the second part, and Farina will be able to finalize the other last part. I just want to begin by saying that for a long period of time, studies in terms of gender in relation to corruption have tried to emphasize that women usually are non-corruptible, and that when women have got a chance to participate in higher levels of governance, that then they are able to reduce the levels of corruption, because unlike their male counterparts, they are not entangled in most of the networks which siphon public funds or public resources from the society. And so gender and corruption is that corruption affects women. Women suffer most. They are victims of corruption in terms of accessing health services and even in terms of accessing of educational services. However, in the last almost 2 decades, literature in terms of gender and corruption has continued to change. And there is now a very strong emphasis that whereas gender and corruption can be able to affect women in different ways, but the issue is that when women have got opportunities in terms of key positions of governance, they almost behave in the same way like their male counterparts. And so today, I just want to give highlights of the nature of corruption in Kenya and the involvement or participation of women in this whole aspect of corruption in the country. To begin with, I want to emphasize that Kenya is one of those countries in Africa which has been rated by Transparent International as the most corrupt, is among the most corrupt countries in Africa. In 1990, it was among the 3rd most corrupt countries in the world. And by 2012, it was rated as 139 out of the 180 most corrupt countries. But in 2022, it had improved. And in terms of ranking, using Transparency International, Kenya was ranked as number 123 out of the most corrupt countries in the world. And I want to emphasize that this corruption is at 2 levels in terms of governance, that at the first level, it affects most of the people who are in charge of key positions in governance, in public governance, in terms of holding positions in the executive, in the legislative, and in the judicial councils of governance. But then there is also the everyday forms of corruption where women and men participate in different ways. My emphasis is specifically in terms of women who are holding key positions in society and how they are either fighting corruption or how they're getting entangled in the whole process of corruption deals in the country. And I just want to emphasize that 1, there have been a number of key corruption deals in Kenya, or cases or scandals. And among the most important ones have been the Goldenberg scandal of 1990s, where the country lost about 24 billion shillings. Then there was the Anglo leasing scandal in the 2000s, where the country lost about 56 billion shillings. And then there has been the 3rd most widespread corruption deal, which is called the NYS 1 and NYS 2. NYS is the National Youth Service 1, the National Youth Service 2, where the country lost, in the first instance, it lost 791 million, and in the last instance, it lost 10 billion shillings. I want to emphasize that indeed, with the establishment of the new constitution in Kenya in 2010, there has been an increase in terms of participation of women in key positions of power. However, before 2010, from 1990s, with the new wave of democratization, there was constant and consistent entry of women in terms of holding positions as cabinet ministers, in terms of holding positions as vice chancellors, in terms of holding positions in terms of directorships in key parastatals. And so between 1990 up to 2024, there has been an increased representation of women in key positions of governance. Consequently, therefore, just like their male counterparts, they have had now an opportunity either to impact in terms of fighting corruption, or they have had the opportunity to also entangle or participate in one way or the other in terms of enhancing corruption in the country. I want to begin by saying that we have had at least there are quite a number of women luminaries in Kenya who have been on the forefront in terms of fighting corruption. But I want just to give examples of three that women have not been left behind, that being part and parcel of the citizens of Kenya, they have been on the forefront in terms of fighting corruption in the country. And that as early as 2005, they were able to come up with a manifesto, which they are calling the Kenya Women Manifesto. And in this manifesto, they demanded that there must be policy and legislative reforms which will be able to destroy all the institutional and legal structures that enhance corruption in the country. And that it was this Kenya Women Manifesto that then laid the basis in terms of women fight against corruption in the country. However, apart from that manifesto, we have had very key women leaders. One of the most notable is the Nobel Prize winner, the late Wangari Maathai, who is known as an environmentalist in Africa. She was on the forefront in terms of fighting high-level corruption, which was staged by the ruling party, Kenya National Union, under the leadership of Daniel Toroitich Arap Moi. And that very many times she was able to organize civic networks, NGOs, parliamentary lobby groups in trying to push against high-level state corruption in the country. And of course, she was met with a lot of repression. There are many times she was taken up, arrested, and put in what we call Nyayo chambers. These are areas, these were chambers where people who are opposed to the government will be repressed, dehumanized, brutalized. And she was able to bear the brunt of those people who fight corruption in the country. And of course, one of her flag post programs was preservation of the forest. There's one of the major forests in the capital city of Nairobi called Karura Forest. And the key leaders, the presidency, the deputy presidency, and the ministers who were male, of course, wanted to take over the land and construct their own buildings, but she was able to fight and stop the corrupting of land in that forest. And secondly, we have had also another very powerful woman leader. She's usually referred to as the Ainu Lady. She was called Mother Karua, and she used to be the Minister for Justice and Constitutional Affairs. And throughout, she has been able to fight corruption at high levels of power in the country. And in fact, her campaign, she has also been able to put a campaign where she wanted to become the president of the country. And now she's one of the key official opposition leaders. But her main agenda is fighting corruption, which cuts across the three organs of power. And finally, in terms of fighting against corruption, we have a very, I want to call it proactive constitutional office in the country called the Controller of the Budget. And it's argued that mostly in many African countries, corruption takes place at the budget making level. And the person in charge of that office is a woman. She's called Mary Nyakango, and Margaret Nyakango. And she has been on the forefront in terms of identifying and, of course, flagging out corruption deals across the executive arm of the government, across the legislature, and even across the judiciary. And, of course, one of the most recent examples.
Mr. Julius.
I can hear from.
Recording in progress. Recording in progress. Recording in progress.
We do want to hear me.
Marina, are you there? You finalized?
Okay, we are back now. Can you hear us, sir? Apologize.
Hello.
Hello, can you hear us? Apologize for the glitch. But we are back now, sir. You can continue with your presentation.
Okay.
All right.
So I continue.
Yeah.
I had wanted my colleague to finalize, but I don't think if she has
You
joined,
have,
she's called
you have
Farina.
just
She's called.
minutes. Sir, you have just 2 minutes to finish your presentation.
Okay. Let me just finish. I want just to finalize that again in the same vein. We have got ministers who have been accused of corruption. We have had one minister of land and water called Charity Ngilu. She was accused of corruption, of course, because of fraudulent acquisition of land, fraud, bribery, and because of that, she was, of course, forced to resign. We have had another minister by the name Anne Waigiru, who was accused in the National Youth Service scandal, where she was accused of having fraudulently taken 791 million. As because of that, she was forced to resign. And then lastly, we have had a very senior director of Aprastatal, who was also accused of corruption during the time of HIV and AIDS funds. She was also forced to resign. And finally, we have had even women universities vice chancellors who have also been accused of trying to engage in personal gain using their offices. But what I want to emphasize is that when it comes to gender and corruption, that usually women, because I think of their nature, that whenever they're accused of corruption, usually they step aside and they normally resign because the pressure against women leaders who are accused of corruption is usually higher. The media has been one of the weapons that have been used to fight women who have been allegedly accused of corruption. And because of the way the media has been able to highlight these cases, demonize the women, that most of the women leaders who have been either accused of corruption, either they have resigned from the offices or they have decided simply to throw in the towel. Unfortunately enough, that the accusation of corruption has not deterred these women. They have gone forward and even sought other positions of power and have been able to continue playing key roles in terms of taking over the representation of women in the key positions of power. And that in conclusion, I want to emphasize that it seems in Kenya, one cannot be able to really have evidence to show that that corruption affects women and male in different ways. The only way maybe it makes women resign, the men, they will be accused, they will not resign, but the women, because I think of their concerns, they are easily able to throw in the towel. Thank you very much. I think my 2 minutes is over.
Thank you very much. You don't have to do that question. So the next presentation is going to be done by Ifeoluwade and Sash Lukoye. The title of their presentation is Corruption as a Gender Viewpoint, analyzing the impact of political and cultural narratives in the feminization of corruption in Nigeria. So, Aziza is online. Aziza, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Prof.
Can we start the presentation? Yeah, presenting the okay.
Hey, good morning, everyone. I'm Phil Valdez, and I'm partnering with Azila Tadikonye on Deep Research. Our topic is corruption as a gender weapon, analyzing the impacts of political and cultural narratives in the feminization of corruption in Nigeria. So, the background of this research, what prompted us, is the idea or the reality that we've come to terms with that in Nigeria, despite the fact that every day we try to make efforts to increase women's representation and participation in politics, the rate at which women are in politics, especially at the top echelon, is still very, very low. And that brings us to concluding that as at the moment, the Nigerian political system is still heavily male dominated. According to the European Union SDG, that's the support for democracy and growth in Nigeria, women still hold less than 5% of elective positions in the whole Nigerian political system after the 2023 election. Now, the main problem is for the few women who have been able to attain this level of political relevance and representation, the problem is that the moment they are in office, people tend to shift their focus from what they actually do in office, from their policies. That's when you start seeing frames into their personal lives, into their families, questions about whether they are good wives and all of these things. And then we know that in the Nigerian political system, corruption is not a new phenomenon. But as far as women are concerned, when there are corruption allegations, this is not the first time in Nigeria that we're having corruption allegations that take years to resolve. But for a woman, the moment corruption is mentioned, whether it's proven or not, the cases begin. People start using these as tools of social power, reinforcing the existing patriarchal norms. Okay, so our objectives were majorly to look at these political and cultural narratives. Next slide, please. How these political and cultural narratives contribute to the feminization of corruption, how these gender perspectives are framed concerning corruption allegations, and how they serve as tools of marginalization for women as a whole. And then finally, we make our recommendations for reform on how to make the political space more inclusive for women. Next slide. Thank you. So our methods, we conducted in-depth interviews with women. We were able to get a few women in politics, women who have served and are still serving, women in the academia, and then women in the media, because media also has a role to play in this study, which I will be unveiling very soon. And then we looked at secondary data. We did a case study analysis of women who have had cases of corruption against them, especially in recent times. So, but before we go into our literature, because I want us to have everything in one wrap with our findings, first into our theories. So the feminist political economy was our main theoretical background for this work. And according to Armstrong and Connelly, which gives us the real idea of this theory, the idea of the feminist political economy is that feminists came to a realization that most of the things they are doing towards making sure that life is better for women is a stark contradiction from the actual reality of what women continue to go through in a political space. So that gets them into trying to make inquiries into how, for instance, the classical political economy approach, whereby we look at growth indicators in the economy, how the economy is growing. We just look at macroeconomic indicators like per capita income and all of those things. And the issue with this is that deep down, these things create serious humanitarian problems and it affects women the most. So what feminist political economy wants to do is create like an alternative to this, whereby you can still examine the economy of the country, but in more humanitarian terms, look at issues like social inequality, health and maternity and all of those things. And these things go a long way to really, really benefit the feminist movement. And then we also use the media framing theory because, like I said, the media has a role to play in all of this. So according to Evan Goffman in 1974, he proposed that individuals usually use frames to interpret and make sense of the things that they experience. But specifically to this research, Zach Lamar in 2025 looks at how media organizations use specific frames to construct stories. That is, when the media paints some stories, when they report some stories, there's a way that it goes beyond just reporting. They create active construction of reality for people who read those stories. And you understand this much better when we go into the case studies that we did. But quickly in literature review, we were able to further establish through research that the political culture in Nigeria has these long-standing patriarchal traditions whereby leadership is naturally viewed as male suitable. So when a woman is in power, it is often seen like a rare occurrence, like an extremity. And that's why women in politics often have the next slide and the one after. Yes, women in politics often have the pressure to really prove themselves as if, oh, this is how we prove that we are worthy of this privilege. In fact, sometimes when we celebrate women who achieve certain milestones, for instance, say, oh, the woman is the first head of department or she's the first president. Sometimes while these compliments are good, they show their achievement. When we over-exaggerate them, it just further reinforces the idea that, oh, this woman being in this position is a rare thing. It's not like the status quo. So it just reminds us that, oh, this position you are in, it's really privileged. You really have to have gone extra miles to get there. And that woman is constantly under pressure that every step they take is under pressure. So that's, and according to Agbala in 2010, she says that the greatest psychological weapon that men use in this patriarchal society is the length of time by which they have dominated compared to women. So the idea that the woman is a novice in that leadership structure is also a means of having those pressure in them. So about feminization of corruption, this research takes very huge inspiration from the work on gender corruption by Professor Motosh right there, and talks about how women in politics are disproportionately accused. The way they are judged, the way they are punished for corruption, they are usually in greater extent than men. And the problem with this is that it's not usually about the wrongdoing itself. It's about power. It's about how they can use these narratives to further prove that women don't really deserve to be in leadership. There's also this idea that women are naturally meant to be more virtuous. They're naturally meant to be paragons of morality. So sometimes when you hear of a woman in corruption, people treat it like, oh, this is totally out of order. Unlike, the way we have normalized male corruption in the patriarchal system that we're used to. And sometimes when men are accused of corruption, it's easier for them to return to their public life. Sometimes after some time, the whole thing just dies down. But most of the women politicians we have had in Nigerian history, after their serious corruption cases, it's been very, very difficult for them to come back. Some of them, that was the end of their political relevance because it's so hard for them to come back. So you see people bring things like their marriages, their clothing, their emotions, and other things into the public discussion. So in our case study, we looked at more recent examples like the Minister for Humanitarian Affairs. We looked at some things. She was accused of mismanaging funds, diverting 585 million to a personal bank account according to business. So even though EFCC noted that there were about 50 bank accounts that this issue could be traced to, nothing concrete has been said on the case yet to prove whether she's guilty or not. But we see on the 9th of April 2024, the BBC, a reputable media organization, published an article that claimed that $24 million was retrieved from different bank accounts connected to this woman. Meanwhile, she clearly refuted them that none of the prosecutors in charge of the case confirmed that any funds were retrieved as at yet. And she sent a public statement out that the BBC was totally a case of defamation. Recently, we saw this woman get an award in the University of Calabar, the award for outstanding service to humanity. I'm going to read the quote of a publication by This Day Life. It says, it was surprising to many that the woman who messed up her name in her short stint as a minister showed up at the event with a broad smile on her face, with her name in the institution's Hall of Fame, an honor reserved for people of high moral standard and values. That quote from a reputable national newspaper already tells you that for a case that is not even yet proven guilty in court, social norms and these narratives have already judged this woman that, oh, she's not worth the kind of person that kind of institution should be recognizing. Why? Just because she has a corruption case that she's handling. We still hear stories of Madam Tizani Alice Madueke, even years after she has left office. Recently, we still have, between 2024 and 2025, we still have 2 documentaries released, one by Sahara TV about this woman. Topics like Nigeria's undisputed queen of corruption. You can imagine, years after this woman has left office. And then you look at recent case studies like this Natasha Ujuagan's case, and then Ms. Mojisola Miranda of the Lagos State House of Assembly. You see that even when women have a clash with the elite consensus in politics, and when those issues, like Natasha's issue, for instance, has nothing to do with corruption, it's very easy to look for corruption allegations as the quickest way to show those women the way out. And the reason behind this is because women do not have that numbers and that network to easily bounce back from corruption allegations the way men do. So it's often easy. For instance, in this case of Ms. Miranda, the former speaker, who is now the current speaker, did not just file a corruption allegation against Ms. Miranda. He even prayed to the court that they should remove Miranda's name as a former speaker. That is, he doesn't want the possibility of her being recognized that she ever held that office. This is something that this day life still reported this year. So the pattern is that female leaders are pushed out or silenced using corruption allegations. So we know that the idea is not about whether they are innocent. Yes, if they are innocent, they could have held their cause more. But the point is that without proving anything, the fact that when those issues happen is when those corruption allegations come up already tells a lot about the timing and the feminization of corruption we're talking about. So in the findings of our interview, we found out that we are in a system of systemic patriarchy whereby, this respondent said there's no way corruption will not wear the face of a woman because those who are painting the face of corruption are men. Whereby, our social and religious norms naturally just bestow men with leadership ideas and qualities, and women are expected to be submissive. There's also the mindset that women are weaker vessels, that women do not have the natural ability to sustain leadership in our excessive generalized world. Next slide, please. And there's this final one that interests me so much, that women love overdoing things. Now, when you see a woman in a political position, she's always more tight in norms, strictness, adhering to protocols. So they said when it comes to this corruption that we are used to, women will also overtake. So the recommendations that we make, let me just skip to that. The implication of this is that the organization of corruption scares many women away from politics. That's why a woman wants to go into politics, has to first ask herself, am I ready to really go through this? Because there will be questions. The moment you are there, questions about your children, your respect, all of these things will continue to come. So recommendations, please. So we recommend that first, the narrative be changed from a gender norm, that corruption be treated as a social phenomenon that it is, that we should stop adding gender frames to corruption issues and let these cases be judged and sorted as they are. And then that anti-corruption bodies should apply the same standards to men and women, which also includes the way media outlets review and reinforce these narratives and report their news. Thanks very much.
Someone has that for representation.
Oh,
Yes. Yes, we still have the next presentation is going to be by Oladunwola, and then not account. Hey, are you online? Can you hear us?
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. My name is Akomu. Is a Yoruba name is Akomu. No, thank you. I hope you can hear me because the volume is actually low from my end. Okay, thank you, ma. So we myself and Mary Oladuni we're working on weaponizing victimization, a trajectory of corrupt female political holders in the Fourth Republic. Okay, so a lot have been said about Nigerian politics that it's been patriarchal, which has been true because according to the Beijing recommendations of the 35% representation of women in active politics, Nigeria has fallen way below that recommendation. Unlike our other African nations where we have a quite number, larger than 6% that we currently have in Kenya, 40% in Senegal, 50% in South Africa, and Rwanda with a whopping 61% representation of female politicians in governance. From 1999 till date, we can only record, according to our findings, only 6% of female representation, with the highest numbers prevalent in the early years of the Fourth Republic. Right now, it has really dwindled down, such that we have just 4 representation in the upper house of the House of Representation and just 15 in the lower house. And out of these numbers, most of those women have either been passive or outspoken, but have not been in a positive light, as we would be seeing in the course of the presentation. Now, a lot of scholars have been clamoring for inclusiveness, that women have been marginalized, but there's been a strong opposition that women are weak, they should be relegated to the kitchen duties or given other deemed positions, like they could be DGs of some establishments, some institutions, but not be in the principal offices. So we've not really gathered enough data with principal office positions, as corruption are usually tagged with those in the limelight. But even the few ones who have been able to find their ways in the limelight, say like the speaker, one-time speaker in the year 2007, Patricia Ete, down to the current, recently the senator, I don't know if I should still call her a current senator because she's been suspended, Natasha Ekpoti. This work would be looking at their representation, which would determine how this door would remain, this accessibility would remain for the future female politicians. Because a lot of scholars always talk about how the men are deliberately marginalizing the women, how they enlarge, exaggerate the corrupt activities against them, like the recent speaker now, how the media would delve into their personal lives and make it look like, oh, they've done something that others haven't done before. True to that. But how also have they also reacted? I believe that when we know that we are of the marginalized group, it's expedient for us to keep the door open for subsequent ones. So the method, this work, the approach is the case study. Of course, we have come up with some names, the case study, and yes, the theoretical framework for this would be political psychology, which would investigate, how we try to weaponize how we react to the accusation, how these politicians reacted to the accusations levied against them, and which would now lead us to weaponizing victimization. So from 2007, we have on the list Patricia Ete. She was a Speaker of the House of Representatives, and she was accused of authorizing a whopping 628 million naira for housing renovation, car purchases, and all of that. Because of her key position, there was an outrage, and being the first female to hold on to a number 3 position in the country, of course, there were oppositions both in and out of the National Assembly. And this was a period where there was the opposing party were active, So there was an opposing, there were incitation by different political parties. She was from the PDP. PDP were supporting her. Others were opposing her. And it was a whole charade of mess. The media did not do right. They started, bringing out details, information, and in all of this, she tended to be, defensive, and she has not been different from other ones too. We have the Zeni Alison Madueke, who was the Minister of Petroleum Resources. She was also accused of money laundering. As a matter of fact, the United Kingdom accused her of bribery on the long run. Stella Oduaha, Minister of Aviation between 2011 and 2014, oversaw the purchase of bulletproof vehicles, without due process, few months into power. Nkechi Mba, the former acting DG of NIMASA, 2022, was also accused of misappropriation of funds. Betta Edu, the Minister of Humanitarian Affairs, was also accused of, money issues. I mean, hers was even funny because she was even young. She was young and she was a woman. She has 2 things working against her, and yet she still did not make use of this position well. And she didn't last there anyways. Then we have Grace Bent. She was a senator between 2007 and 2011. And we have Natasha Akpoti, who, like I said, is a senator. Well, she's a senator. of this current National Assembly. Now, how they have reacted has been our own focus. Because when you try to weaponize victimization, it shows that you are not a victim. That's the first connotation. It shows that you are actually powerful, but you are just trying to put yourself there as a victim to garner emotional, sentiments from the public, from a fellow gender, and all of that. While all of these ones, the previous one, the first 6 were quiet, Natasha was so bold in her exploitation of being a woman. She even went to the extent of going to the IPU, an international organization, a chapter of the United Nations, to present a case. She had other women in the house, 3 of them. And what ended up coming up from this case now, she was accused, she in her own words said that she was trying to manage a Niger Delta fund, which was a committee fund, and she was the chair. She was being confronted by the Senate president, and then this was her reactions. In her interview, she called into a program, a human activist program called, organized by someone called the Ordinary President. And when she called in, she said, she brushed over the allegation. She was accused of mismanaging a particular fund meant for the Niger Delta program. And then the next thing, she dived into how she was being witch hunted, which was a typical mechanism of weaponizing victimization. She talked about how she was sexually harassed 2 years before the event, or 1.5 years before this event took place, how her seats was changed without her consent, how different situations has happened. In all of this, excuse me, the other women and even the IPU she went to, the only thing they kept asking for was for proof. We talk about feminism as though it is a war against the male gender. I think feminism has just been debased. It is actually more than this. It is empowering women, not fighting. It should be empowering women, not fighting against the male gender. But recently, it has always been a shift of blame. You were accused of something. Now, nobody's talking about the accusation. We are now concentrating on the sexual harassment. When Senator Etagiwa was interviewed on Arise TV, Senator Etagiwa, although she was misunderstood, but the point she was trying to make was, at this point, Senator Natasha was beyond assault. That before getting into the Senate, you might, be harassed here and there, but the moment you get there, you own equal. Well, wow.
Yes,
okay.
Yes. We sent you a message, but maybe you didn't check.
Right now?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, anyway, let me just go straight to the consequences of this. The consequences, as I've earlier mentioned, is that it further shortens the door against real victims of, harassment or false accusation and all of that. Because in the long run, the actual accusations are not dealt with. And then the other aspect, which has nothing to do, it has no correlation with the accusation, is now being exaggerated. It's not being blown out of proportion. Now, when younger girls are being actually harassed, will they be listened to? Recently, we had the case of the Unizik girl. She's a young girl just coming up. She harassed a lecturer. She was beating the man, raising insult and abuse and all of that. She was being videoed. When she was faced with the consequences of her actions, she turned it around to a sexual harassment. We are beginning to see a trend where women now use sexual harassment as a weapon to cover up for their actual offenses. I think accountability is key here. The fact that you are a woman does not exonerate you from facing consequences for your actions, whether it is corrupt activities in the public place or private places.
All right,
Since I
thank
have 1 minute, I think I just have to end it.
Thank you very much. So our next presenter is Solar Lighton. She'll be presenting on engaging the nexus between women and culture in Nigerian politics, agency, and stereotypes. So you're welcome.
Hello, Zainab. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. I will try to share my screen. Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Zainab Monisola Olaiton. I'm a postdoctoral fellow at the Center for International and Defense Policy at Queen's University. Today, my presentation focuses on engaging the nexus between women and corruption in Nigerian politics, agency, and stereotype. Okay, sorry, my slides are not. Sorry, I'm trying to move my slides. Okay, I'll just go on with it. Now, the nexus between women and corruption in Nigerian politics is a heavily contested discourse. At the base of this is a gendered expectation that women should be more moral, anti-corrupt, and effective. This gendered expectation is often rooted in a stereotypical perception of women in the political system as soft and should exhibit a modern and nurturing governance style, thereby creating a sort of dichotomous governance style between male politicians and female politicians, where the former is expected to be firm, while the latter is expected to be soft and flexible. Now, when women politicians exhibit firm traits, they are adjudged to be governing or acting like men. Now, this skewed perception transcends into women and corruption discourse, as they are expected to be upright, fair, anti-corrupt, and moral. Yeah, so my paper then examines this gendered stereotype that surrounds the relationship between women and corruption in Nigeria. Just to confirm again, can you hear me properly?
Yes,
Okay. Now, as a form of methodology, I use qualitative methodology and I draw comments from social media in reaction to corruption cases, selected corruption cases of 3 prominent female politicians, because my paper primarily focuses on reaction to the cases rather than the validity or the falsity of the cases. Now, my paper also engages the importance of, centering women's agency as political actors rather than just the perception of women as gender actors alone. Oh, my slides. Okay. Now, for the first section, I'll be looking at women and corruption discourse, different perspectives in terms of literature or framework. Now, in this section, I present different scholarly perspectives on the relationship between women and corruption to show ongoing discourse. In a study by the World Bank in 2001, researchers argue that women are more likely to disapprove of bribery, they are less involved in corrupt activities, and to a lesser extent justify the use of bribery by others. Now, UNDP in 2018 also conducted a study in Ukraine that dispels the assumption that women are less inclined than men to participate in corrupt action at the state administration level. Now, Esri and Chirillo, they engage in the notion that the public typically sees women in leadership positions as less corrupt. In their 2013 study, Fairer Sex or Purity Myth, Corruption, Gender, and Institutional Context, they argue that issues of cultural context and political system and accountability, for example, could better explain why women may be or appear to be less corrupt than men. So they focus on how political context or institutional context could also matter in the discourse around women and corruption. Now, Young and Eidinman, 2016, also note that because women leaders are often held to higher standards than their male counterparts, they face higher risk if they participate in corrupt activities. We also have a 2010 UNDP and United Nations Development Fund for Women study that notes the gendered opportunity structure of corruption, meaning that women have fewer chances to engage in corruption because the necessary patronage and the political relationship traditionally have been well held by men. Now, we also have Boom 2015, who writes about the belief that women are less corrupt than men. We have Gods in 2017, who then argues that the issue of corruption is genderless. Perhaps it's about the institutions themselves, regardless of the gender of the person involved in the scandal. So now, more specifically, scholars such as Agbala Jobi and Sharon Omotosho, they've engaged the intersection of gender and corruption and feminizing corruption within the Nigerian context, more specifically, looking at the intersection between these two themes. So now, often the relationship between corruption and women is then considered through the simple question of whether women are less corrupt than men. Yet, this question is very contentious, perhaps often the wrong one, because the intersection of women and corruption is a nuanced and loaded one, and a simple question of whether women are less corrupt obscures the complexity embedded in this intersection, with perspective noting that women are not necessarily honest or they are not necessarily averse to corruption than men. So my paper isn't interested in the stereotype and perception around women and corruption and public reaction to corruption scandals of women. So now, just a bit of quick context. Corruption in Nigeria corruption is a global phenomenon. However, in Nigeria, it has become the principal means of private accumulation. We also see that corruption has eaten so deep into the fabric of the Nigerian society. We see different cases of corruption and the of these scandals. Now, so I focus on 3 cases of corruption scandals by women politicians. I look at Patricia Ete, who was the first female speaker of the House of Representatives. I look at Stella Odua, who was a former Minister of Aviation, and I look at Dizani Alisi-Madueke, who was a former Minister of Petroleum. Now, in the case of Madam Patricia Ete, the first female speaker of House of Representatives, she resigned following an indictment over the misappropriation of fund of 628 million. Other people have mentioned that, so I will not focus on that. We have Stella Odua, who in July 21, 2023, the AFCC arraigned her on 25 counts charged bordering on money laundering. And prior to that, in 2013, she was accused of buying BMW vehicles at the cost of 255 million naira. Then we also have former Minister Dizani Alisi-Madueke, who was arrested in London in 2015 on multiple counts of bribery. Now, what are some of the public reaction to these scandals, which is the focus of my presentation? So I look at comments, like I said in the introduction, I look at comments from Facebook and I look at comments from Twitter. So some of the comments, I will read out one and then go on with my presentation. So my brother, I'm afraid of the kind of women in our generation now. Their livers are made of stone. Gone were the days where women were chosen to handle finance of organization as a result of their meticulous nature in handling issues and also their fearful nature. Women now teach men how to loot without fear. Another comment noted she did what 10 men could not do. Then another comment, she was a proxy. So now, based on this comment that I've highlighted, my discussion focuses on the issue of agency and stereotype. Now, these comments are divided into 2 sides. So we have one side that focuses on how women are meant to be upright as they are incapable of being corrupt. So we see that in the comment, or she was a proxy, kind of like a disbelief that a woman could, engage in such scandal. And then those that believe that corrupt women politicians are worse than men. Now, the first side is read with a sort of infantilization of women as meek, moral, unable to siphon huge amounts of money alone, while the second side comes with harsh criticism, not on the act itself, but on the gender of the person that committed the act. Now, both sides suffer from the same problem. The centering or the focus of women politicians as gender actors rather than as both gender and political actors. So we focus on how women politicians are women. So we look at them from the gender aspect rather than recognizing that as much as they are women, they are also politicians. Furthermore, I argue that the increased criticism or disbelief that arises when women politicians engage in corrupt activity is based on gender stereotype. This criticism is based on a skewed perception and gendered expectation of what women should be broadly and how we permeate that into the political system. This argument is that when women politicians are accused of corruption, there's a sort of disbelief that a woman could do such a thing. I mean, we saw in one of the comments. Then I note that the stereotype about the meekness of women and the fairer sex as less corrupt, more moral, incapable of misappropriating public funds are harmful to the agency of women politicians because it exposes the masculinization of certain behaviors within the political system, where strength is akin to masculinity, translating to the likening of women politicians, a strong women politician. We see the case of Margaret Thatcher, for example, this iron lady trope that we see oftentimes. Now, the stereotypical attitude then surrounding women politicians restrict their agency as political.
2 minutes.
Yes, thank you. Noted. Restrict their agency as political actors capable of carrying out certain political activities. The notion that women are less corrupt, moral, and ethical being, albeit is good, I mean, face value, however, is grounded in an infantilization of women as incapable of, engaging in other political activities that men are naturally seen to be able, because when we look at reaction with male politicians, the focus is often on the act itself rather than gender of, oh, this person, a man, why will a man take this much money, rather than like, oh, the money it took. So it's often focused on the act. Now it boxes the actions of women politicians within a constructed frame based on gender stereotype. And this stereotype also explains why we often see that women politicians are put in soft portfolios. So women affairs, humanitarian affairs, culture and tourism. So that also feeds into that. Now, in conclusion, at the base of this relationship between women and corruption in Nigerian politics, particularly the question of whether women are more/less corrupt than men, a pervasive stereotype around gender behaviors. Stereotypes hinged on patriarchal norms on how women should behave, influence how the actions of women politicians are perceived. I then argue that we need to see women politicians not just as gender actors, but both gender and political actors. This reframing enables us to focus on their actions holistically and provides a space for a nuanced understanding of the actions of women politicians. The focus on their gender, while useful in certain instances, does not bode well for
Zainab,
Zainab.
hello, Zainab, are you still on?
I finished my presentation. Did you hear my presentation?
We just the last 1 minute.
Oh, you couldn't hear my conclusion. Oh my God. Okay. Can I do that now?
Yes.
Okay. In conclusion, at the base of the relationship between women and corruption in Nigerian politics, particularly the question of whether women are more or less corrupt than men, a pervasive stereotype around gender behaviors, sometimes hinged on patriarchal norms on how women should behave, influence, and then these norms then influence how we perceive the actions of women politicians, especially when they're engaged in corruption scandals. I then argue that we need to reframe how we perceive women politicians, not just as gender actors alone, but as both gender and political actors, because it then enables us to view their actions holistically and provide a nuanced understanding of their actions. The focus on their gender, while useful in certain instances, does not bode well for affirming their agency as political actors. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So our last presenter, but not the least, is presenting rights allowance. He is presenting Obìnrin Lọ́jà Obìnrin Lékè. Cool. That's what I was written here.
Obìnrin Lọ́jà
Okay, that's what it's here. The cultural feminist analysis of corruption in contemporary African culture. So you're welcome. Is he here or is online? Hello, Ibrahim.
Ibrahim, can you hear us? Okay, share the slides.
Is it?
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Please confirm you can share or you can see my screen.
Sorry.
Please confirm you can see my slide.
Yes, we can see your slide.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm honored to be presenting in front of distinguished professors and also fellow presenters.
Sorry, Ibrahim, can you
Yes,
adjust
I'll
your?
be presenting on Ibrahim Model
Right. Can you adjust your mic? We can't hear you properly. It's not very clear.
Okay. Okay. Is it better now?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll be making a presentation on like a cultural feminist analysis of corruption in contemporary African politics, which is some first of all, I'm happy to be presenting after the presenter who already laid the groundwork for my presentation. So this is my outline. Contrary to what everybody who has seen my topic has thought, this is not my topic is not an attack on the roles that women have. But looking at there's a research by Familisi and also Kanan Awan where they detail some of the cultural perspectives of women in contemporary African societies. Obìnrin lọ̀dẹ̀, obìnrin lèké is just one of the many cultural proverbs that have been um, created for the women folk. Also, in addition to that, there's one more that I have here. It says, ènìyàn tí ò gbọ́n ló ń bóbìnrin mulẹ̀ ijó obìnrin bá máa wo ló bàjẹ́. So these are some of the cultural proverbs that have been used to qualify women. And it is on this that I begin my presentation by not propounding rather, by using the post-colonial theory to understand the roles that women have had in pre-African political settings. So the post-colonial theory is here to help us to understand how colonialism and other factors have shaped African societies, including gender roles, power structures, and creating and helping us to understand the the um, roles that corruption has in the society. It focuses on colonial legacy, centralized governance, and economic dependency, and so many other factors. So when combined with feminism, it shows the roles that or the involvement that women have had in corruption in historical settings. Um, However, majority of research have focused on how colonialism has been like a major factor in the roles that women have had in pre-colonial settings. Of course, also focusing on the patriarchal norms that marginalize women, limiting their access to power and resources. So it's a little bit of a paradox here because we often always talk about how women have been restricted or limited or marginalized in political settings, and on the other side, it's also still women that have the bad titles in this setting. So this marginalization leads to women engaging several acts for survival in this sector. So I take a look at women's roles in pre-modern Africa, look at how the roles that they've played. So several researchers have also worked on this. They've looked at some of the significant roles that women have had. Ajepong in highlights women's political leadership, like the Iyalude in the Yoruba society, contributing to policy administration and survival. Also, other ones note the economic contributions with labor, also in the economic stance and reflecting gender balance rather than hierarchy. Also, at the time, we also note that corruption was less systemic and traditional rulers were accountable. Of course, there were societal values at that time, which made there was moral guidance and everybody was acting according to this pre-modern African setting. And also, regardless of this, it's also noteworthy to mention that there was a little bit of corruption. There was gift giving by leaders and a few other examples. So in contemporary African settings, we look at how colonialism is also one of the major factors that have mostly eroded these traditional African settings or African values, which have brought about patriarchal and capitalist systems that marginalize women and erode these African values that we had. And also, we also link corruption as to colonialism and its institutionalization, using material enrichment to co-opt leaders and creating legacies that we still have in our societies still today. And so, these colonial influences eroded the pre-colonial values of honesty, discipline, thereby leading to systemic corruption. And as such, as women gradually transit into or get more opportunities in this political space, they are met by the institutional structures that have been built on these corruption cases. And of course, a lot of examples have mentioned the and Grace Mugabe in Zimbabwe. So the point, my core argument here is today is that women's roles in corruption is not driven by gender factors, but rather by institutional factors. And I give examples of data showing um, corruption, and data on corruption in Nigeria and Africa, losing 300 billion annually to corruption, and Africa losing almost $1 trillion to corruption. And but of course, we also know that there's literature that says that, or that have argued or found out that women have been absent, majorly absent in all of this. So how are we dragging women into these corruption cases? And so, but then like the second and third presenters mentioned, when a woman is found to be corrupt, there is always so much noise about that. So my findings or my argument is that um, corruption is more of a systemic issue rather than a gender-based issue. And then there's a lot of cultural expectations that vilify women in corruption, and also culture plays a very important role in these allegations. And so my key points here today is just that research suggests that women's roles in corruption evolved from noble to complicit due to systemic factors and not gender traits. And colonial legacies and economic pressures, not culture alone, also drive women's involvement in corruption. And also the title of Oberlo Diagoniki and similar other um, proverbs reinforce patriarchal values by scapegoating women. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brian. So we have had 5 different sessions. Yes, I know that there will be questions. The essence of this to generate debates. This is a different perspective for now, and we have had different dimensions of feasibility of this corruption. So questions and yes. Yes, how many people? Yes, you want to know how many people? Yes, online. There's one. Okay, let me start from number 1, number 2. Yes, you're one.
I'll be one.
Number 1, number 2. Okay, sorry. Comments. Yes, question 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Anyone online who has questions, please? None for now. None for now. Okay, so we'll start from here. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much. Thank you for coming. Mine is not a question. It's just to set the tone for the conversation, because after this, we're also going to have another session, which is a follow-up on this. And then some of the issues that have been raised here, there will be counter issues, and so on and so forth. But we decided to do this together because we've both been following each other over the kinds of work that we've been doing around corruption. And when I started working on feminized corruption as a concept, I was looking at all of these challenges that women are facing and how much of the stereotypes and all of it is affecting women in leadership. And so we decided to put this call together and invite people to write on it. And so we're not surprised at the kinds of things that we are listening to, but we just want to note that it's still work in progress. We are hoping to expand that research on feminized corruption. And I'm sure that a lot of people are here because they are wondering who is feminizing corruption, what's feminizing corruption, and so on and so forth. On that note, we have a research group that is open. The call is open currently. And then we are hoping to also harvest more perspectives this time around, not only from Nigeria, but from across Africa. So we are grateful to our colleague from Kenya, Julius, who was here to share with us. And so let that just be the basis of our conversations. You see, we're both taking notes because we are going somewhere with all of these. And there's a book that is also coming. Hopefully by next LSA, maybe we'll be discussing that book. It's on feminized corruption and political communication in Nigeria. So that's the setting the tone, and then we can open it up for conversation.
Yeah, thank you very much. So
I think my own is just a comment about women inclusion politics, this idea of giving women space to actually climb the reach like that. It's an argument that has been around for a while, and each time I listen to this argument, and I raise this question: why do I have to give you opportunity in politics? We call it politics. It's a negotiated and contested process. If you go back to pre-colonial period, we have powerful women that forced their way to the pinnacle of political set in Lagos, for instance, Madam Tinubu. In Abeokuta, familiar with it. But now, like you said, weaponizing, feminism for women, you have to give women some percentage. Who does that in politics? It's a process. You want to contest for power, you fight for power. Power is not something you give. I think, again, we are not even talking about some women godfather in Nigerian politics. I'll give an example of your states. We become nothing without Musura Musumi right now. But we are not factoring that into our argument of we also have women who are power poles within the political landscapes of Nigeria. I think we should begin to look at that. In Lagos, you mentioned Miranda, the speaker. She was also a product of power block. Sometimes when you see some of these things on the pages of newspaper, but behind the scene, whether you rise or fall in politics as a woman depends on your own political camp. Group of men can promote you. When it's time for them to bring you down, it is not gender consideration, it is political permutation. But on the surface, we read into gender. But they are also product of negotiated process behind the scene. If I promote you as a woman to a political office, and right there you are not serving my interest, I will not expect to get you out, whether you're male or female. That is power.
Thank you very much.
Tell me what was you actually enjoyed session. So my family from Nigeria, we all present us. To me, it's normally of this panel is representation and corruption. We still boil down to women, how they get what and how they utilize what they get. But to me, I think on the issue of representation, we are treating malaria, we are treating headache instead of treating malaria, in the sense that the journey of representation in terms of women started from the area. We have a patriarchal society where men lead and decide what happens in society. Then the advent of religion, maybe Islam and Christianity, reinforce it with the idea of the man should be the head of the family, make provision, then women should be at home. So at the end of the day, so it is already in us. So it is gender role created by the society that this is what where you should be and where you should not be. And nobody is stopping women not to contest. In 2003, because we just concluded one is said to Lagos Assembly, they have to do with women representation. Since 1979 to 2005, we have only 33 women. In the current assembly now, we have only 4 women. And you can get the issues. Why? The problem of women in this part of the world is not men, it's women against women. In 2003, Jubril Taylor contested against Obasanjo in the primaries. People who voted for Obasanjo are women. Let the vote she got slowly and that goes down. Then issue of corruption, that's other people have. Then women, they are the homemaker. They are the one who nurture us. The essential are somehow hard about women. So we expected them to be upright. That's why they are chasing them a lot when it comes to the issue of corruption. So we expected them to be perfect. So that's the reason.
Yes, ordinarily I was to go straight into my question, but there are some things that will not just settle down today. So I quickly just want to respond. Say that the quest for women inclusiveness in terms of representation
is a product of the response to the historical marginalization that women have faced over the years. And you want to ask yourself that even in politics, why do we talk about zoning? It is to fight against some sort of marginalization across ethnicity and all of that. Why do you have all saying that 3 senators across each state? This is to ensure representation and inclusiveness across different ethnic groups of the society. And to my brother here that talked about historical gender roles, the question is that have you considered the current shifting family roles that we have? Look at this book now. We have women well represented. You are hustling academically, they are also here hustling. They've left families behind, and then you get into some family, you see women taking up responsibilities that were formerly imposed, men's responsibility. So if we have all of these changes, I think we also need to begin to think, along political life to ensure that those things that have held women down in the past are broken so that women can also progress politically. That's just a reaction. Now to the to effect, I was just thinking that something is still quite missing, and that is to say that the culture of purity and that sense of selective scrutiny that we see that women face. And most of this is well entrenched in our culture and religion. Women, there's this unspoken expectation of purity that the culture has placed on women. Aruba and Osun State, who carries women. You go to people church wedding, women wear white as a symbol of purity and all of that. You see some culture when an animal is seen, they only need the virgin to cross over it and the animal. So there's a whole lot of unspoken expectation of purity, and that's what transcends into politics. That whenever you find women in politics, there's that unspoken expectation of purity and all of that. So it's something that you might want to look into. It goes beyond the surface of politics, but these are issues that are well entrenched, and why we have it, that is why we have all of this selective scrutiny. And to the second presenter online who talked about weaponizing victimization, I think my first advice to her would be that research goes beyond curiosity. It's all about clarity. At some point, we felt we just giving a narrative that's, some of the narratives that we were all familiar with. And the major case you used was, far away from the subject matter, which was on corruption. You're looking at Natasha. The issue of Natasha is far away. And personally, I still hold that, if we all reinforce the bullying that Natasha faced, what then will be the hope of a 15-year-old at Salia Koka that is really, if the Senator of the Federal Republic can be that it, and then we all from different angles or through different perspectives are stylishly reinforcing that, what would be the hope for the common person? And for the last presenter, Obìnrin Godane, Obìnrin Eke, I was expecting a different analysis. And what I was expecting was to use that phrase to buttress the role of women as whistleblowers. Obìnrin Eke, Obìnrin Godane. An average whistleblower should be seen as an Godane or as an Eke. And that is where I was thinking that you would come from. So you might want to look at that dimension as well as women seen in the society as not condoning corruption. That is another dimension we should be looking at. And finally, to the team, thank God that this is a work in progress. I want to believe that there's going to be a disclaimer from the team that this own effort is not to reinforce women corruption, but rather to highlight, that space of selective scrutiny that women feel in the political space.
Your name and institution.
Oh, okay. My name is Dr. Kingsley Odunia from OAU.
Thank you. The next question. Okay. Yeah, then sure.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for this very exciting conclude. I'm Shia Valentine from Federal University Gary. So my most of my comments and questions are for the second presenter, Madam Eno. from the topic, weaponizing victimization, the trajectory of corrupt women. Nigerian politics in very corrupt women. I think that's very strong. And the selected women that you looked at, Patricia Ete, Stella, Dezani, Natasha Rossi, all of these women, their cases are still in court. Their cases are still in court. They've only been charged. They've not been prosecuted. And then the topic is saying corrupt women. So it has the topic that it has been ruled and condemned and they be sent to jail. So I think you need to rephrase that if all of these are allegations and like first present as corruption cases usually take a very long time. Imagine the time it's over 10 years and it's still a case in court. So please, corrupt women, it's very strong. And the people you are looking at, their cases are still in court. Then and what are the objectives of this paper? And what methods did you use to arrive? Because it seems that the conclusion is that when women are accused of corruption, they now play the victim's card and resort to sexual harassment as a tool for weaponization. I look at the 4 cases. I don't know which one. I don't know when Patricia Ete resorted to sexual harassment or Stella Udwa or Dejan. So I think you may need to tell us what are your findings. At what point did these women resort to that as a sort of victimization? And the last person, sorry, Natasha, that you. I don't know, it's not a corruption case like my name said. So please, I want to know what are the objectives of this paper, what are the methods you arrived at your conclusion, and what are the findings of the paper.
Thank you very much. She's really sure we're even exactly very much the kind of places. I think just that the organization stuff, I called someone, they are recruiting me. I called a cousin. I told her to call a politician. I knew. She told me she cannot call me. Why? Because the politician, we were small, in secondary school, in our teens, wanted to sleep with her. That they've been trying to sleep he was sleeping at the as the young girl, but she refused. So she was asking not once, not twice. They were recruiting in UN to give him a job. Then he has learned that he doesn't know how to approach him again. Look at the story. And the organization is claiming that if the man actually made an attempt at her, that he no longer in that kind of space, for not accepting to allow, Natasha is busy. So look into her. And she's saying that she recognized. So this is a scholarly library, and all of us, we with your eyes, we critically engage. You don't just. This is like she put her comment, her research from social media comments. That's it. I'm so sorry, but this is actually how I see it as a social. She's affirming what is there. Yeah. Thank you. I give their comments. Maybe let's start from we say yes. If you want to respond, just 1 minute to respond first.
Okay, thank you very much. First to the general comments. I just say these are the issues. Because sometimes when we do this research, what we want to do is take a look at these problems. Now, the thing with research is, yes, there is the beauty of trying to go deep down, but we must not forget that while we acknowledge that there are cultural issues entrenched, going deep layers of analysis, we are also especially focusing on recent trends like corruption. So there's an extent to which in that specific research, we will keep digging deep and all of this. And yes, like you rightly said, we are not trying to, like I try to really reiterate, this is not about saying, oh, those women were right in their cases or not. It's not about whether they are innocent or they are guilty. It's just about the kind of narratives that fly regardless of innocence or guilt.
Thank you very much. No, your response in 1 minute.
Hello, are you there?
Are you still there? Okay. Okay.
Hello, can you hear me, please?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. So it was quite low, so I really didn't hear the other comments apart from the one about the objectives, my findings, and the fact that I used corrupt women as a very strong word. I totally agree, and I appreciate the responses. I totally agree to the fact that the word corrupt women was highly strong. And the fact that you said that these cases are still in courts, and I kind of generalized the fact that the accusation was moved to shifted from a corrupt issue to sexual harassment. Am I correct with all of this, Ma?
Yes.
Okay, so in my presentation, Ma, I said apart from the first six, Natasha was one of the outspoken ones who changed the narrative from the issue at hand to a sexual harassment issue. And I linked it to what Senator Itagiwa mentioned on TV, that as at this point, as a sitting senator, you own equal rights as every man in that place. And so a mention of sexual harassment was a bit dicey. Because, okay, so in her sentence, in her call to the ordinary president, as I mentioned earlier, she made mention of the fact that she was removed from a committee because of mismanagement of fund. But according to my argument here, nobody is talking about that. Everybody is now concentrating on the narrative she has created of sexual harassment. She mentioned it herself from that TV program, that she was removed because she was trying to manage, in her words, trying to manage a particular fund meant for the Niger Delta people. And she said she was trying to manage it. And then she was just removed for no reason from the committee. So my question is, isn't that enough reason to be removed from a committee? As at that point, it was not even yet made public.
Okay. Yeah, it's okay. Thank you for your comments. Is there anybody online who has 1 or 2 comments? I don't think there's any question. But I have a question for Julius. Sorry, I have a question for Julius. You talked about, I was happy to hear about the women who had tried to fight against corruption. But I was going to ask, has that actually kind of engendered substantive representation in governance in Kenya, given the narratives of the role of those women in fighting corruption? Julius, are you still there? Okay, Zina, please go ahead with your comments.
Thank you so much for yielding.
I think let my colleague Farina. Okay. Farina, can you help me there?
Farina is not online. Don't worry. Don't worry, Julius. Zena, please go ahead with your comments.
Okay, I'll just make it quick. I think as I'm listening to reactions and comments from the floor, it's important that as Nigerians, if we can understand why we need quota system based on regional reasons, and why we need quota system because some people are deemed as less disadvantaged, or sort of, then we should be able to understand how structures of power then marginalizes women and why we need, affirmative actions to include women in the political system. So just because we have certain women being able to go through the system doesn't mean the system is receptive to women. So there's a difference when we have model minorities and a difference when the system is holistically receptive to marginalized groups. And I think it's important that we reflect on how these structures of power, systemically marginalizes women, and how these issues that we're also talking about in this panel feeds into all of these stereotypes, gender stereotypes, cultural norms, attitude. And I think on the side of presenters also, okay, I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I just had 30 seconds.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much to all the contributors. And what I also want to say about corruption, feminized corruption, as everything that is going on, is that for us as researchers, I think we also need to understand how structures of power really interact, particularly when we look at Senator Natasha's case. When all of these things started happening, the next thing people started talking about is, this is why we don't give women power. This is why women are not supposed to be in leadership positions. When, in times past, more terrible things have happened. You've had a sitting senator went to a sex shop, physically assaulted somebody, nothing was done. But when things like all of this happen, they are not just on the surface level. We should begin to inquire into the nature of all of these things. And that's why I loved what a contributor mentioned about, the purity culture and what we need to look into, particularly when it comes to what is sex? What do we have to do? Does he have 2 husbands? Does he have 3 husbands? When the same thing are not expected of men, the Oshun and all of that. So we're going to look into that for our research to also bring something more, cogent forward to contribute to this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think it's been quite engaging. And yes, I like what Kislu said. We are not here to reinforce. It's not possible. But it's important to listen to different, and because this is what academic does. We can't say we don't want to be blinded by our own views and then put aside the different narratives are very, very important. That's what this session is all about. Thank you all for joining us. And yes, we're here for another section.
Yeah, we're going into another room. We're going into B310, and then we will hear the issue of Natasha again, and so on. And then, so please, B301. Yes. B301. Yes. B301. In 10 minutes. Welcome. Thank you so much.